with temperatures peaking over 110 degrees in Texas, the state power grid is under pressure, and Fortune reports some Bitcoin miners are getting paid to shut down. And joining us now to discuss is Joshua Rhodes. He's a research associate in the Weber Energy Group at the University of Texas at Austin. And we've got Steve Kinard. He's the director of Bitcoin analytics at the Texas Blockchain Council. Welcome, Joshua and Steve. Thanks for joining us. So maybe we'll start off with Joshua. Perhaps you can explain the extent of the energy problem, because I know you track the energy grid very closely in Texas.
Yeah, so there's a big issue right now in Texas with we've got over 100 degrees in all the major metropolitan areas across Texas, and with the amount of people that have moved here kind of over the pandemic area or pandemic time, everyone wants air conditioning, and so you couple the extremely high heat with all the people that have moved here, and you're just getting a lot of demand on the system. And with electricity, you have to match supply and demand in real time. So if every single one of those air conditioners is wanting electricity to keep the air cool, we've got to be making that much electricity at the same time.
So are you seeing rolling blackouts currently? And what is the role that miners play in are they putting a strain on the power grid?
Yeah, no, so far we haven't seen any blackouts. There have been some localized outages, but that's been mostly because of storms and things that have rolled through. But we've been able to match supply and demand so far. But I mean, we do see we have seen higher prices during these types of times, because when supply and demand get tight, that's generally when our electricity market sends prices higher. Bitcoin mines consume a lot of energy. They do consume a lot of energy to mine the currency, but they can also be flexible if they're willing to turn down their consumption during times when the grid is tight. That can be helpful to the system to keep the AC on for everyone else.
Interesting. So Steve, maybe you could jump in here. Texas has the most Bitcoin miners in the country. Are they shutting down? To what percentage do they consume energy on the Texas power grid?
We have seen an industry response to the tight supply and demand dynamics that Josh mentioned. Core Scientific and Argo are two active miners here in Texas that have been very public about that. And I think in the coming days and weeks, we'll have more announcements about a broader industry response to what we've seen here in Texas. Right now, miners aren't really significant enough to be the solution to this current issue of the need for more supply. But I think Bitcoin mining really presents the solution for the future of how we bridge that gap. If you think about it, there's only a couple of 100 hours a year in which temperatures get really hot or sometimes really cold, and we get these kinds of emergency conservation warnings. So the issue here is, how do we bring the abundant resources that Texas has, whether that be natural gas, wind, or solar, and make it available for those couple hundred hours? And the answer is Bitcoin mining, because they are that flexible load that can help to finance bringing that energy to market. They're there 24/7 year round. And then on days like today, when we do need that incremental supply, they can power down, as they've shown here in the past couple of days. And so we hope to continue to work to expand the industry here in Texas, so that in future summers we won't really even need to have these conservation warnings, because we'll be able to finance an increase in supply and have it ready and available when we need it.
Josh, I wonder if you could jump in here. Do you mostly agree? I mean, I hear that the Texas Blockchain Association says that nearly all industrial scale Bitcoin mining operations in Texas have shut down their rigs as of Monday, and that just represents about 1% of the total power grid in Texas. So maybe not, too much of a strain on the system. And have they been cooperative?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a good question, and for individual companies and things, it will be up to them if they release the information about them turning their electricity or turning their rigs off and consuming less electricity. Because in general, if they're just responding to tight conditions or price, that data aren't necessarily public unless the mines have have entered into some of the formal kind of demand response programs that ERCOT, the Texas grid operator, has, or they're a controllable load resource. Essentially, they're able to bid into our electricity market just like a power plant. So, because you have to match supply and demand in real time, if you increasing supply can be functionally equivalent as decreasing demand. And there are ways for mines to basically act as negative power plants if they sign up for it. And it's not compulsory that they do, but they have the option to.
Right. From a Fortune report, we understand that ERCOT, the Electric Reliability Council of Texas, is brokering these demand response agreements that pay industries, including some Bitcoin miners, to downsize operations during times of peak demand to provide more energy to the grid. So are you hearing this as well, Steve, that Bitcoin miners are essentially getting paid to shut down? And what happens to mining profitability during this time?
That's correct, and I've had the privilege to actually present at some ERCOT meetings in Austin. The Texas Blockchain Council has been very active in advocating for creating a more dynamic market to provide these kinds of economic incentives to bring these large flexible loads, Bitcoin miners, to Texas. And providing that economic incentive really makes sense for everyone, for all Texas citizens, because the miners are the most efficient way to strengthen the grid through their flexibility. The alternative is just to build out more generation that only gets used a couple hundred hours a year when we really need it, and then it's sitting there idle. And so it's just a better economic approach to solving the issue, to expand the Bitcoin mining industry, which of course is a private industry that's bringing investment and jobs to Texas. And so we have a very good relationship with ERCOT. We continue to work with them to accelerate the industry moving to Texas and growing to Texas, and we'll have more announcements in the coming weeks around that.
Steve, just quickly before we wrap up, is this putting pressure on miners, though, in terms of profitability and having to shut down?
Generally, no. The miners will receive an economic incentive, and they are actors in a free market. And so if they're competent actors, which most are, they'll shut down at a time at which the economic incentive would offset the lost revenue from not having the mine running. In other words, they would either break even or actually benefit by providing that service to the grid. And they'll receive revenue for that. And so there should not be a negative financial impact to miners' performance from supporting the grid. And in fact, it's a way that they can capitalize on this service that they provide. And it is a valuable service because it strengthens the grid.